Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Now, this week I want to go back to the 1960s and I want to revisit the very popular science fiction television series of that time, Star Trek. And I've got to secretly admit, growing up, I was an avid Star Trek fan. And truth be told, I still am. Now, Star Trek, if you don't know the background story, Star Trek was wagon train to the stars. During an era when cowboy pictures and cowboy television shows dominated the world, Gene Roddenberry saw an opportunity to create a futuristic look of the world that could be. So Gene Roddenberry began to meet with scientists. He began to meet with physicists. He met with astronauts. He met with astronomers. And he began to talk about creating a futuristic television world of man exploring space. But he wanted to do it in such a way that everything they presented in the series was feasibly possible to be developed in the future. And interestingly enough, among the many things that we saw for the very first time in Star Trek, many of those things that were created in the thinking of Gene Roddenberry have now become part of our everyday life. We have universal translators that can convert English to Spanish or Spanish to Chinese or Chinese to Japanese. We have these incredible translating tools that are available, again, going back to the idea that came from Gene Roddenberry. Some of the other things that we've seen coming out of the Star Trek series that are part of our everyday life is the iPad or the tablet, the smartphone, diagnostic medical beds, holograms, 3D printers, and I would even say the advent of AI likely had its origins in Star Trek. Now, in the third season of the original Star Trek TV series, the crew of the Enterprise encounters a distress call from the planet Scalos. I love the names that they created to come up with these mystical planets in faraway places as the crew of the Enterprise boldly went where no one had gone before. Now, this pre-recorded message informed the crew of the Enterprise that the planet Scalos is attempting to survive some mysterious affliction. And the few remaining Scalosians not yet affected and have passed on have taken shelter in a very specific area of the planet, and they're pleading for someone to come with assistance. So in response, the Enterprise goes to the planet Scalos and the landing party beams down to the surface. But once they get there and they pull out their tricorders and they begin to scan looking for evidence of life, they're unable to detect any evidence of life on the planet. What otherwise appears to be a very vibrant, very technologically advanced civilization appears to be completely abandoned. It appears the crew of the Enterprise got there too late. But interestingly enough, the only thing out of the ordinary was the incessant buzzing of insects that continually harassed the crew members. Now, upon beaming back up to the Enterprise, the crew continues to be plagued by this harassing, buzzing sensation. And even as random events begin to occur, the crew eventually begins to realize they've been invaded. And not just invaded, but they've been invaded by a race of beings who exist and move at an incredibly accelerated rate of time. The hyperbolic state of the Scalosians makes them invisible to the human eye. Now, this episode is aptly named Wink of an Eye. Now, Captain Kirk's coffee is tainted with water from Scalos, which contains the ingredients that causes him to accelerate and join the ranks of the Scalosians, moving in accelerated time. Now, to the unsuspecting crew on the bridge of the Enterprise, at one moment, Captain Kirk is there, and the next, he's gone. In their mind, Captain Kirk has been abducted. Now, the Scalosians, after debriefing Captain Kirk into what happened, they begin to explain him what their plan is. Their plan is to enslave the crew of the Enterprise and to use them as breeding stock. This accelerated state of being had rendered the men of Scalos unable to reproduce. And to perpetuate their species, they needed breeding stock, and the Enterprise was going to be the individuals to make that happen. Well, long story short, because I don't want to take you through the entire episode because you can go watch it on Pluto or some of the other streaming channels, Dr. McCoy concocts an antidote to the Scalosian water. Now, in order to get it to him, Mr. Spock accelerates himself, drinking some Scalosian water, so he himself can get to the captain, help him thwart the plans of the Scalosians to overtake the Enterprise, return the Scalosians to their own planet, and then ultimately restore the ship back to the control of the Enterprise crew. So, in the wink of an eye, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock reappear in normal time back on the bridge, much to the relief and surprise of the crew. And at the end of the episode, as always, the Enterprise sails off to continue its mission to explore strange new worlds. So it begs the question, how fast is a wink? How fast is the blink of an eye? Well, it was a great question. I thought I would ask myself. And when I ask myself a question, I've got to go find the answer. So here's what I found when I did some research. The blink of an eye is incredibly brief. The blink of an eye lasts somewhere between 1/10 of a second to 2/5 of a second. Now, think about that. In 100 milliseconds, the eye blinks. And in 100 milliseconds, the blink of an eye, an automobile on the interstate highway moving at 70 miles an hour travels 10.67 feet. That's 2/3 of the length of an average car in 1/10 of a second. Now, in that same 1/10 of a second, that 100 milliseconds of time, the blink of an eye, our amygdala sitting deep inside our brain can record and draw its first impression of a stranger in 1/10 of a second. Now, in that same short period of time, 100 milliseconds, light can travel over 19,000 miles. And lest we think that blinking is one of the fastest things we've ever seen, keep this in mind. A hummingbird will have flapped its wings 10 times by the time you or I blink our eyes even once. So why do we blink? Why do throughout the day we find ourselves blinking our eyes? Well, blinking is necessary for lubricating, moisturizing, and cleaning our eyeballs. Blinking also delivers necessary nutrients and oxygen so we can maintain good eye health. And when the eye becomes dry or debris accumulates in the eye, our vision can become blurry. So blinking is also a process that helps clear away the dust, the debris, and any of the irritants that could damage our delicate eye tissue. And at the same time, it creates a smooth, moist surface that allows light to focus properly so we can see. Now, most people blink somewhere between 15 and 20 times a minute. So if you do the math, that translates to between 900 and 1,200 blinks an hour. Or if we calculate how many times you and I are going to blink during the waking hours of each day, that's somewhere between 14,400 and 19,200 blinks of our eyelids every moment that we're awake throughout the average day. And again, if you do the math and really extrapolate it, we blink more than 7 million times a year. Now, one other interesting thing I found about blinking, and this is where I want to lean in and spend a few minutes talking today about the blink. A blink also serves as a momentary pause. Now, you may say, John, what do you mean by that? A blink serves as a momentary pause, and it allows the brain a moment in time to process visual information and prevent sensory overload. It allows our brains a moment in time to blink. Now, think about your day, think about my day, think about everyday life. As you and I go through life every single day, our brains are constantly bombarded with stimuli from a variety of sources. Things we see, things we smell, things we taste, things we hear. Our five senses are inundated all day long with stimulus. So to make sense of the world around us, buried deep within our brain, and I've talked about it in prior episodes of this podcast, a very unique part of our brain called the reticular activating system. That reticular activating system, the RAS, filters how we process certain stimuli, especially so when several things are happening at once. Now, the eyes are part of this system that allows not only our eyes to blink, but our brain to blink. And in blinking, the brain gets a momentary pause to process information. Now, there's a very, very famous video from 1999. It's available on YouTube. Now, this YouTube highlights the power of the blinking of the mind. So after today's podcast is over, I'm going to give you a couple of places to go where you can actually look that video up and watch it for yourself. The original 1999 version is known as the Selective Attention Test. So again, after we finish the podcast today, go to YouTube and look up Selective Attention Test and follow the instructions on the screen. What's it going to do? It's going to challenge you as the viewer to count how many times students wearing white pass a basketball back and forth in a specified amount of time. Now, in 2010, this video was re-recorded, and it's known there as the monkey business illusion. Now, these two videos, the selective attention test and the monkey business illustration, also demonstrate the power of selective attention. It's referred to in science as the attentional blink in action. So, to further study the phenomenon of attentional blinking, scientists decided they wanted to take a series of participants through a series of visual stimulus tests. So participants that were brought in for the study were presented two images, image 1 and image 2, referred as T1 and T2 in the study, and these individuals sitting in front of a screen were shown image T1 and image T2 in successive order. And each time the images were presented, the time between T1 and T2 was shortened. And here's what they noticed. As the time between the images got shorter and shorter, the participants' ability to detect and even see the T2 image was increasingly impaired. The shorter the gap between T1 and T2, the more difficulty the participants had in even detecting or seeing both images. As the time got closer and closer together, they saw the first image and not the second. The conclusion was this: it demonstrated the brain's need to blink in order to process information. And what the scientists found as a result of the study was this: as the brain was processing the T1 image it had just seen, the brain needed a moment in time, a blink, in order to process. And if the T2 image appeared during that blinking moment, the resources that were necessary to actually see and process the T2 image were temporarily unavailable. And so these scientists discovered that our brains need time to process all the information that it's receiving throughout the day. If we upload information too quickly or receive too much stimulus at one time, our brain, like an old video arcade game, temporarily tilts and it can't process more information or new information. And neuroscience studies have gone on to show that when we're focused on our goals or we're engaged in very thoughtful deliberation, when time seems to slow down around us, neural impulses travel across our brain at a rate of 1 to 4 miles an hour. But when we're not engaged in mindfulness, we're not engaged in thoughtful deliberation, or we're not singularly focused on a goal or an objective, when we're experiencing the real world around us in real time, the same neural impulses that would travel at a speed of 1 to 4 miles an hour are traveling across the neural network of our brain at speeds up to 250 miles an hour. Now, that's a lot of information coming into our brain all at one time. So imagine what happens then when our brains have to go from fast to slow or from slow to fast, and there's not a lot of time for the brain to adjust. Well, guess what happens? Our brain, needing time to make sense of what's going on in the world around them, blinks for just a moment. Now, I found an interesting book that I just finished reading called The Neuroscience of You. It's a fascinating read on our brain and how it works. And Professor Chantel Pratt, that wrote this book, explains to us that this attentional blink is the mental trade-off that you and I go through every day between our internal goals and objectives and our opportunity and responsibility to be aware of the world that's all around us. And as the world continues to bombard us with stimulus, our brain is going to struggle to make sense of everything going on in the world. And when that happens, we experience attentional blinks for up to 500 milliseconds at a time. That's a half a second going on and off throughout the day that our brain literally blinks. For half a second, our brain tilts and can't process information. And when that happens, like the physical blinking of an eye, guess what? You and I are temporarily blinded to the world around us. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting because in those moments when we're temporarily blinded, there's a gap in our memory, there's a gap in our perspective. What I find interesting is when we're engaged in deep, introspective, thoughtful deliberation, when we are being mindful, this attentional blindness can stretch not beyond a half a second, but it can stretch into minutes or even hours. Think about it. When you and I are deeply engaged in thoughtful thinking, deep introspection, or we're really zeroed in on a task or a project we're working on, time seems to pass without our conscious awareness. We're oblivious to the world around us and what's going on. I can think about the times that I'm deeply engrossed in an intentional task, such as writing for an article or writing a page or a chapter for a book or recording a podcast or creating content that I'm later going to record on a podcast or teach in a training. When I'm doing those things and I look up, hours seem to have flown by and I don't have a clue what went on in the world around me during those times. Now, studies have also shown that you and I experience these same attentional blinks when we're driving, when we're attending a concert or a sporting event, or when we're engaged in a fast-paced, busy activity. And of course, we can experience attentional blinking when we experience information overload. And now it gets even more interesting when we think about what do we do with that gap in information? What do we do with that gap in our memory, our gap in our perspective? Now, you and I, we all experience attentional blinking at some level all day, every day. And that, as you can imagine, leaves gaps in our thinking, in our memory, and in our perspective. Now, most of our brains don't like an open loop. Why? We want to solve the problems and questions, and we want to answer those questions going on in our mind. Because if those questions and those random, unseen, unheard, unresolved random things going through our mind aren't closed, it takes energy to keep those random thoughts active in our thinking. So what does our brain do? Our brain works to bring order to disorder and find some way to effectively close the loop. Now, in scientific terms, it's a process called confabulation. And I love it because if you think about it, confabulation in the middle of that sets the word fable or story. So the process of confabulation is where the brain draws on past experience or known patterns of behavior to make sense of what's incomplete or ambiguous in our thinking. Our brain is essentially going to construct a narrative, a fable. It's going to make up a story to fill the gap in our perception and in our memory. So think about what that means for you and for me every single day of our lives. That means that parts of our day, when we experience these attentional gaps and we go through this confabulation process, what we actually believe to be true and what actually happened to us may be in part a made-up story, a fable that's simply there to fill the gap and close the loop. What you and I might stake our reputation on may be nothing more than partially a mental construct, a narrative, a fable, a story we've told ourselves to fill the gap in perception and memory. This is the mind's way of dealing with the blink that happens all day, every day. Now, maybe that's one reason why 10 people can witness the same event at the same time and really from the same basic perspective of viewing that event and provide 10 different stories regarding what happened. It's also why a single witness to an event in a court of law may be challenged as it relates to the reliability. So it really has to make you and I think and wonder how much of what we believe to be true, based upon what you and I have experienced in our lives every single day, is really real, or what part of that is a work of self-created fiction, a story, a fable, or a narrative that our brain has concocted to fill the gap and to close the loop. In the 2008 movie, The Vantage Point, we see the assassination of an American president. And the interesting thing about that movie is this movie is told and retold from several different perspectives. People all viewed the assassination from a different physical place in the area where this president was shot. Now, each person who witnessed the event saw something that the other witnesses didn't. And as the investigators began to interview and talk with these people and gain their perspectives of what happened, they began to fill in the gaps of the story. And when they were finally able to piece all the pieces of the story together, the investigators had a much more coherent picture of what truly happened and who actually committed the crime. Now, this is one of the reasons I believe John Maxwell says one is too small a number to achieve greatness. One of the overlooked benefits of having a team, a group of good, supportive people around you, is the fact that a team can come together and help us overcome the brain blanks that you and I experience, that we all experience throughout the day. Just like in the movie The Vantage Point, each member of the team is going to bring a different perspective. And that perspective is going to help us fill the gaps in our own brain blanks with real information rather than a self-created work of fiction. You got to remember that you and I, we all see the world differently. We all have our own perspective of life. But guess what? You and I, we all have our own blind spots. You and I, we all experience our own brain blanks at different times during the day. So when we come together as a team and we begin to collaborate, each individual brings their own perspective. They're going to bring what they observed, but also what they missed when their own brain blanked. But as we come together as a group and every team member contributes, each and every team member gets to see and hear what they may have missed in the event their brain blanked at the wrong time. You got to remember, we all have blind spots, but we don't all have the same blind spots. So what one person in a group or a team may miss, another member of that team or that group may pick up on. And as we bring this collaboration and this coordination together, we add layers of perspective. And all of a sudden, what we do in that process is we identify things that you or I may have overlooked or ignored, or we didn't see because of our own blink moment. So when everybody's contributing, in the totality, what do we have? We've got a better picture of reality because all of the pieces of the puzzle can be assembled together in such a way that we've got more information to make a decision that leads to a better outcome. So let me give you 5 ways a team can help you and I and the organization you may be involved with or leading overcome the blank. Now, first, a team can help reduce the cognitive load. When you and I or any group of people are facing a challenge or a stressful situation or a massive project that we've got to get done, the stress of that moment can exasperate attentional blank. So as we assign responsibilities, as we allow each individual on the team to operate in the area of his or her giftedness or strength zone, we allow the very best people to do what they do best. And when we divvy up those responsibilities, we're going to share the stress load, not on one person, but among multiple people. And when we share the stress load, we reduce the stress for every single member of the team. And when we can reduce the stress for every single member of the team, we're also going to reduce the likelihood that each individual is going to blink more often. And when we can be in the moment and not having blinked or tilted, we can see the world as it is and get real information rather than a fable or a story. Now, the second thing a thing can do is it can help you and I identify and prioritize information. Because as a team, as we examine as a group what needs to be done, the life experience and the expertise of each individual team member gets an opportunity to contribute as we collaborate together. Their fresh perspective and the fresh perspectives of the other team members are going to help fill the gap so that everybody can identify and prioritize what needs to be done. And we can do that with legitimate information, not some concocted story. Now, being able to do that is also going to allow the team to speed up or slow down as needed or required to evaluate what's needed to win and then ultimately implement and get done what needs to get done. Now, the third part is really a continuation of one and two, and it's the fact that a team provides different perspective. Because we share our own life experience and we come from different places, you and I are going to see the world through a different lens. This is something I've also talked about many times in the Black Belt Leadership Podcast. So the ability of each individual member of the team to examine a project, to look at a challenge or a situation based upon their own experience and expertise, and viewing this same challenge or project or situation from multiple angles. Just like in the movie The Vantage Point, it's going to lead to a better, more comprehensive understanding of the nuances of the issue or challenge itself. We're going to have an opportunity to better understand as a team what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and the best way it needs to be done to accomplish a task or an objective. It's also going to allow us to recognize in advance the problems that we are likely going to face in bringing that solution to a close and identifying creative ways to mitigate or avoid those challenges and those problems altogether. Again, remember, we all blink, but we blink at different times. Now, the fourth way teams can help us overcome attentional blink is this. Attentional blink can be strongly influenced by emotional factors like stress or anxiety. So when we come together as a team, not only do we divide responsibilities based upon who's the best person to do that part of the assignment, a team also serves as an emotional support network. It's when we come together as a team that we have the opportunity to encourage each other, to inspire each other, to attend to and meet each other's needs, to support each other, to be there to pick each other up, to rally them on when they're tired, and to help each individual team member be valued and appreciated for their contribution to the project as a whole. Now, when we do that, we serve as an emotional support network for the other members of our team. Think about what that does for the team or the group. It builds emotional resilience. It expands the capacity of the team to confidently navigate through challenging times you and I are all going to face, while at the same time minimizing the blink. And when we can minimize the blink, we see more of what's really there rather than concocted fables, stories, and narratives. Now, the last thing that I believe a team does to help minimize or avoid attentional blink is this. Team members can come together. They can pool their individual observations and knowledge to create a more complete picture of the project, the situation, or the circumstance. We saw that in the movie The Vantage Point. As the investigators interviewed each individual person that observed the assassination, they got another clue, and they got another clue, and they got another tip, and they got another resource or another piece of evidence that they were able to bring together. And as they began to put all these pieces together, all of a sudden, the varied pieces of the puzzle came together as a whole. And that's what happens when team members bring their individual observations and knowledge to the project. Now, this again can be extremely helpful because remember, if one team member experiences a blink and misses a piece of important information, another team member may not have blinked in that moment, and they're going to catch what you and I may miss. So each team member bringing their own perspective is going to fill in the gaps and help the team close the loop. So here's what I want you to remember as I wrap up today's podcast. You and I, we all experience the blink. Some of us remember it more frequently than other people, but guess what? You and I, we all experience the blink. Some of us just more often than others. And while a team itself doesn't directly address the underlying neural mechanisms of intentional blink, it does something amazing. Having a team creates an environment that minimizes the blink. Having a team also maximizes the use of all available information and all available resources in real time to fill the gaps, to close the loop. And it does that with real information rather than self-created works of fiction. So the next time you think, you got to ask yourself, did I blink? And maybe you're going to wonder, what did I miss? This is where having a team around you, individuals that are there experiencing life with you, are going to give you the opportunity to help fill the gap with real information rather than a narrative, a fable, or a concocted story. So let me leave you with this. How much life are you living today that's real, and how much of that is a construct of your own thinking? That's food for thought from the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.